February 17th, 1941. The location is the North Atlantic, 300 miles southwest of the Irish coast. The time is shortly after midnight. The steam merchant ship Gairsoppa is running dark, alone, and dangerously low on fuel. She has been forced to detach from convoy SL-64 because her coal bunkers are nearly empty, reducing her speed and forcing a diversion to Galway. Without the defensive screen of the convoy, she is a sitting duck in a hunting ground dominated by the German submarine force. She is moving at less than 10 knots, a heavy steel shape pushing through the winter swell. The attack arrives as a solution to geometry and patience. U-101 fires multiple torpedoes in the heavy sea. After earlier misses, one finally strikes the starboard side at number 2 hold shortly after midnight. A single torpedo is fired. It tracks through the cold water and impacts the starboard side of the merchant ship, directly amidships at the number 2 hold. The chemistry of the explosion is violent and immediate. The warhead detonates, shattering the steel plating and blowing the hatch covers off the deck. The structural integrity of the ship is compromised in a split second. The foremast snaps from the shockwave, crashing down and destroying the radio antennae. This is a critical mechanical failure. It means the Gairsoppa cannot transmit a distress signal. She is mute. The physics of the sinking are dictated by the cargo she carries. The holds are packed with a strange mix of commodities. There is pig iron, a dense, heavy raw material that acts as a deadweight anchor the moment buoyancy is lost. There are 1,765 tons of tea, a light organic cargo that will eventually saturate and spoil. And hidden deep within the secure locker, there is silver. But right now, the silver is just weight. The ocean rushes into the number 2 hold, driven by hydrostatic pressure. The water does not trickle. It hammers in, displacing air and destroying reserve buoyancy. Most merchant ships take hours to die. The Gairsoppa takes 20 minutes. This is a terrifyingly short duration for a vessel 412 feet long. The weight of the pig iron drags the bow down. The stern lifts, the propeller clears the water, and the engine room floods. The steam boilers, subjected to the sudden thermal shock of freezing seawater, likely rupture. The internal bulkheads cannot withstand the uneven pressure. They buckle. The ship slides beneath the surface, not with a struggle, but with the heavy finality of a stone dropping down a well. As she descends, she passes through the crushing depth zones. The hull groans as the pressure builds, 100 feet, 200 feet. The light fades completely. She is falling toward the abyssal plain. She carries with her 85 men and a fortune that the British government is desperate to secure. But the ocean does not care about economics or war efforts. It only cares about mass and gravity. The ship hits the bottom and settles upright, shrouded in absolute darkness. She has fallen off the map. For the next 7 decades, the Gairsoppa ceases to be a ship. She becomes an anomaly on the seabed. She is a steel tomb containing 110 tons of silver bullion. The silver is worth millions, but it is locked inside a decaying hull, guarded by water pressure that can crush a submarine like a soda can. The British government writes off the loss. The insurance is paid. The file is closed. The silver sits there, 3 miles down, waiting for technology to catch up with the physics of the deep ocean. The question is not where the ship is. The question is how any human engineering can reach down into the crushing blackness and bring 110 tons of metal back to the surface without being destroyed by the very water that hides it. 15,420 feet. That is the vertical distance between the sunlight and the silver. To understand the scale of the engineering challenge, one must look at the most famous shipwreck in history. The Titanic lies at 12,500 feet. The Gairsoppa is resting nearly 3,000 feet deeper than the Titanic. It sits in the abyssal zone, a region of the planet where the environment is more akin to space than to the surface ocean. At this depth, the water column exerts a pressure of approximately 6,800 pounds per square inch. This number is abstract until you apply it to mechanics. It means that every single square inch of the hull, every hatch cover, and every silver bar is being squeezed by the weight of 3 miles of ocean. It is the equivalent of having a full-sized pickup truck balanced on your thumb. If a human diver could somehow teleport to this depth, their lungs would collapse instantly and their body would be crushed into a biological paste. Even military submarines designed for stealth and combat cannot survive here. Their crush depth is typically less than 3,000 feet. The Gairsoppa is 5 times deeper than the operating limit of a standard attack submarine. The hostility of the North Atlantic operates on 2 levels. On the surface, the environment is chaotic and loud. When the ship went down in 1941, the survivors faced the freezing wind and the breaking swell. The Lascar seamen and the British officers in the lifeboats were subjected to hypothermia and exposure, a brutal biological stripping of heat that killed them one by one. But down here, the hostility is cold, silent, and static. The temperature is near freezing, hovering just above 30 degrees Fahrenheit, but the water does not freeze because of the immense pressure and salinity. This cold preserves the wreck. It slows the rate of oxidation. It creates a chemical stasis where steel decays at a glacial pace. The ship sits upright on the seabed. This is a crucial stroke of luck for the salvage operation. When ships sink, they often turn turtle, flipping upside down, as air trapped in the hull tries to rise while the heavy engines drag the stern down. If the Gairsoppa had landed upside down, the silver would be buried under thousands of tons of crushed superstructure and machinery. But the Gairsoppa landed on her keel. She is sitting in the sediment as if she is docked in a harbor of eternal night. The hull plating is intact enough to hold its shape, but it is tired, the rivets are stressing, the steel has been corroded by 70 years of saltwater immersion. For decades, this depth was the ultimate lock. The silver was safe not because it was hidden, but because it was unreachable. Treasure hunters knew where the ship likely was. The coordinates of the convoy and the U-boat attack were matters of historical record. But knowing the location and reaching the location are 2 different things. In the 1940s and 50s, there was no technology on Earth capable of doing work at 15,000 feet. The Gairsoppa was effectively on the moon. To unlock this vault, you cannot use brute force. You cannot drag a grapple hook across the bottom because the cable would likely snap under its own weight before it even snagged the wreck. You cannot use explosives because you might scatter the silver into the deep silt, losing it forever. You need a presence on the bottom that has the dexterity of a human hand but the structural resilience of a tank. You need to replace the diver with a robot, but that creates a new paradox. The robot must be controlled from the surface, connected by a tether that is 3 miles long. This tether is the lifeline, but it is also a giant sail catching the current and creating drag that threatens to pull the machine off target. The physics of the deep ocean do not want you to be there. Every variable, from pressure to darkness to drag, is fighting against the recovery. The silver is there, sitting in the number 2 hold, waiting for a visitor who can survive the crush. To move 110 tons of metal, the laws of engineering usually demand heavy industrial machinery. You need cranes, bulldozers, and hydraulic rams. You need brute force. But when that metal is lying 3 miles underwater, brute force becomes a liability. If you pull too hard on the wreck, you might rip the ship apart and spill the silver into the deep sediment where it will be lost forever. This creates a logical paradox. The salvage operation requires the lifting power of a freight elevator, but it must be applied with the delicate precision of a neurosurgeon. In the summer of 2012, the solution arrives on the surface in the form of the seabed worker. This is not a typical treasure hunting boat. It is a 291-foot multi-purpose support vessel, a floating industrial platform designed for the most extreme subsea construction tasks. It hovers over the site using dynamic positioning, a system of thrusters that keeps the ship locked to a specific GPS coordinate within inches, fighting against the wind and the Atlantic swell. Beneath the hull of the seabed worker, the team deploys the instrument of resurrection. It is a work-class remotely operated vehicle, or ROV. This is a robot the size of a small car, equipped with high-definition cameras, powerful LED floodlights, and hydraulic manipulator arms that can exert thousands of pounds of force or pick up a porcelain teacup without cracking it. But the robot is not autonomous. It is tethered to the ship by a thick umbilical cable composed of copper wires and fiber optics. This tether introduces a massive physics problem called drag. As the ROV descends through the water column, it must drag 15,000 feet of heavy cable behind it. The ocean currents push against this cable, creating a giant sail area. If the surface ship moves even slightly out of position, or if a deep underwater current catches the tether, the ROV can be whipped around like a toy on a string. The pilot, sitting in a control room 3 miles above, has to fly the robot while mentally compensating for the lag and the drag of the umbilical. It takes hours just to reach the bottom. The descent is a long fall through absolute blackness. When the ROV finally reaches the target, the lights flick on. The darkness of 70 years is pushed back by the artificial glare. The SS Gairsoppa appears on the monitors. It is a ghost ship, coated in rusticles, appearing almost organic after decades on the seabed. The pilot flies the robot around the superstructure, mapping the damage. The torpedo hole in the number 2 hold is visible, a jagged wound in the steel. This is the entry point, but it is dangerous. The metal is sharp and unstable. The plan is not to smash and grab. The plan is surgical. The engineers have equipped the ROV with specialized cutting tools designed to slice through the steel shell plating of the upper deck. They intend to peel back the skin of the ship to access the cargo hold from above. This is a technique that requires intimate knowledge of the ship's architecture. They are not just digging a hole, they are performing an autopsy. They must cut through the steel plates without collapsing the structural ribs that hold the ship together. If they cut the wrong support beam, the deck could cave in, crushing the silver boxes and trapping the ROV. The robot hovers over the deck, its manipulator arm extending the cutting tool. The pilot watches the screen, checking the telemetry. The latency is minimal due to the fiber optics, but the pressure is immense. The silver is right there, just feet below the rusted steel plating. The ROV is on site. The tools are ready. But the silver is still locked inside a steel cage that has been hardening in the chemical bath of the ocean for over 70 years. The resurrection is about to turn into a demolition. The operational window in the North Atlantic is a ticking clock. The season for deep water salvage is dictated by the violence of the surface weather. The seabed worker can maintain its position in moderate swells, but if a major storm system rolls in from the west, the ship will be forced to disconnect the tether and retreat. Every hour spent cutting steel is an hour borrowed from the approaching winter. The salvage team is not just fighting the depth, they are racing against the inevitable deterioration of the sea state. The target is the number 2 hold of the Gairsoppa. The ship is 412 feet long, but the operation is focused on a square patch of deck plating no larger than a garage door. The structural integrity of the wreck is the primary unknown. After 70 years of immersion, the steel has lost its ductility. It is brittle. The rivets that hold the hull plates together are essentially rust dust held in place by habit. If the remotely operated vehicle applies too much torque while cutting, or if the heavy cutting tool impacts a load-bearing beam, the entire forward section could destabilize. A collapse would not only bury the silver under tons of jagged scrap metal, but could also trap the precious robot vehicle, ending the mission instantly. The engineers employ a strategy that can best be described as a high-tech can opener. The ROV pilot manipulates the cutting arm to slice through the deck plating. The process is slow and methodical. The friction of the cutting wheel generates heat, but the freezing water instantly cools the cut, creating a cloud of steam and debris that obscures the cameras. The pilot has to work through the murk, relying on sonar and instinct. Section by section, the steel skin of the ship is peeled back. The ROV grabs the cut plates with its manipulator claw and gently moves them aside, stacking them on the adjacent deck like playing cards. As the final plate is removed, the interior of the hold is exposed to the artificial light for the first time since 1941. The cargo is not immediately visible as a gleaming pile of treasure. It is buried under layers of silt, decaying tea chests, and the detritus of a sinking ship. The ROV pilot uses a suction dredge to gently vacuum away the sediment. The process is like an archaeological excavation performed by a giant remote-controlled hand. Then the glint appears. The dredge clears the mud, revealing the geometry of the bars. They are stacked in rows, just as the stevedores in Calcutta placed them. The silver is not bright white. It is stained by the chemistry of the deep ocean, but the shape is unmistakable. The high-definition cameras zoom in on the ingots. The pilot maneuvers the lens to catch the markings. Stamped into the metal are the words H.M. Mint Bombay. This is the forensic confirmation. This is not pig iron, this is the insured bullion. The confirmation brings a moment of triumph, but it immediately shifts into a new crisis of logistics. The hold is open and the silver is identified, but now the physics of recovery turn against the team. Each bar weighs approximately 1,100 ounces. They are heavy, slippery, and densely packed. The ROV cannot simply scoop them up in a bucket. The robot must pick them up individually or in small clusters to avoid overloading the lift basket. There are thousands of bars down there. The Salvage has turned from a demolition job into the most expensive and dangerous factory assembly line in the world. The robot is hovering at the bottom of a gravity well, and it has to move a mountain of silver one brick at a time without dropping a single ounce back into the silt. 2,792. This is the specific number of silver bars lying in the mud of the number 2 hold. It is a mathematical figure that represents a staggering physical challenge. To recover the cargo, the salvage team cannot simply attach a cable and hoist the entire ship. They must perform the recovery piece by piece, repeating the same high-risk motion nearly 3,000 times. The operation transforms from a feat of exploration into a grinding test of endurance and precision. The remotely operated vehicle becomes a mechanical laborer at the bottom of the world. The pilot, sitting comfortably in the control room on the surface, must direct the hydraulic manipulator arm to reach into the hold, grasp a heavy, slippery bar of silver, and place it into a specialized recovery basket. This sounds simple, but at 15,000 feet, the water acts as a dampener. Every movement is slowed. The visual perspective is flattened by the camera lens. If the pilot squeezes the gripper too hard, the hydraulic pressure could damage the soft silver or the crate. If the grip is too loose, the bar slips and falls back into the sediment, kicking up a cloud of silt that blinds the cameras for minutes. The process is a slow, rhythmic ballet of industry. The arm extends, the claw closes, the arm retracts, the bar is placed in the basket. This cycle repeats for hours, days, and weeks. The pilots work in shifts, fighting mental fatigue. One mistake with the joystick could foul the tether or smash the expensive tooling against the jagged hull of the Gairsoppa. As the baskets are filled, they become heavy payloads. The physics of the lift now take over. The winches on the seabed worker must haul these loaded crates up through 3 miles of water column. The ascent is fraught with tension. The cable is under immense strain. As the load rises, it passes through different current layers that push and pull the basket sideways. The dynamic positioning system of the surface ship fights to stay vertical over the load, keeping the line taut and true. A snapped cable here would be catastrophic. The basket would plummet back to the seafloor, likely burying itself so deep in the impact crater that it would never be found again. But the cable holds, the winches turn. One by one, the baskets break the surface of the North Atlantic. When the silver hits the deck of the seabed worker, it is black and fouled with ocean grime. It does not look like treasure, but as the team sprays down the bars, the silver shines through. The stamp of the Bombay Mint is verified on bar after bar. By the end of the operation, the team recovers 48 tons, then more, eventually reaching a total of approximately 110 tons of silver bullion. This represents 99% of the insured silver carried by the Gairsoppa. It is a statistical perfection that is almost unheard of in marine salvage. Usually, the ocean keeps a tax, hiding a percentage of the cargo in unreachable crevices or scattering it during the breakup of the ship. But the Gairsoppa gave up almost everything. The recovery is valued at over $200 million. It is a triumph of robotics and engineering, proving that no depth is safe from human reach if the economic incentive is high enough. The silver is safe, the investors are satisfied, the ledger is balanced. But as the holds were emptied, the ROV pilots found something else. The ship was not just carrying bullion. It was carrying the final written words of soldiers and civilians, preserved in a mail hold that the ocean had surprisingly decided to spare. The recovery of the silver was a transaction. It was a deal struck between a salvage company and the British government to balance a ledger from the Second World War. But while the bullion generated the headlines, the true weight of the Gairsoppa story lies in what was found alongside the metal. The remotely operated vehicle, while clearing the holds, recovered approximately 700 letters. These were personal missives written by soldiers, sweethearts, and merchants in India, destined for London. For 70 years, they sat in the pitch black, buried under tons of sediment. Paradoxically, the same anaerobic conditions that make the deep ocean so hostile to life acted as a preservative for the paper. Without oxygen to fuel the bacteria that consume cellulose, the letters survived. They were legible. They were the voices of 1941, finally delivered. But the letters only speak because of the silence of the crew. To understand the cost of this voyage, one must look at the mathematical impossibility of the survivors' journey. When the ship went down, 32 men managed to launch a single lifeboat. They were 300 miles from land in the middle of winter. They had limited water and almost no protection from the Atlantic gale. For 13 days they drifted. This was not a passive wait for rescue. It was a slow, agonizing war against exposure. The physics of hypothermia are ruthless. The body shuts down blood flow to the extremities to keep the core warm. The mind hallucinates. One by one, the men died. The British officers and the Lascar seamen watched their companions succumb to the cold and the thirst. By the time the coast of England finally appeared on the horizon, the boat was a floating morgue. They reached the Lizard Point in Cornwall. They had navigated 300 miles of open ocean without navigation tools. They were within shouting distance of safety. But the ocean had one final cruel mechanical twist. As the lifeboat approached Carthylian Cove, the Atlantic swell caught the small craft in the surf zone. The boat capsized. The men, weakened by 2 weeks of starvation and muscle atrophy, were thrown into the freezing breaking waves. 3 of them drowned just yards from the dry land they had fought so hard to reach. Only one man, Second Officer Richard Ayres, survived the landing. He was pulled from the surf by a coast watcher. He was the sole witness to the end of the Gairsoppa. He lived the rest of his life carrying the memory of the 85 men who did not make it. The silver that was recovered in 2012 pays for the fuel of the salvage ship and the bonuses of the crew. It satisfies the insurance claims. But the real legacy of the operation is not the medal. It is the fact that we could reach back into the abyss and retrieve the final words of a generation that vanished. The physics of the deep ocean usually destroys everything it touches, but in this rare case, it preserved the only things that truly mattered. The silver is just currency. The letters and the story of the lifeboat are the testament.